This is the narrated presentation on competition policy. You need to get out pages 49 to 53 of your workbook because this presentation should help you fill that in. The presentation takes about 15 minutes, but unless you're really good at note-taking, you'll probably take about 5 extra minutes of pausing in order to write down the things you want to write down. I do apologise for the sound quality. I don't have a very good microphone, and the fact that this is very dull. There's no bells and whistles. It's not a particularly fun 20 minutes of your life, but hopefully it's a useful and efficient and referenceable way for you to take your notes. This article shows how Google can use vertical control, i.e. controlling the operating system Android, to help promote and give an unfair advantage to its own search engine, Google Search. This is an echo of one of the earliest European investigations into the IT industry when Microsoft was caught out doing the same with its Explorer browser. So the European Commission is investigating this and trying to protect consumers. The problem the Commission has identified is vertical control, and the consequences are that Google can entrench monopoly power in the search engine market. The Commission will wish to increase competition in the browser market, or decide that it doesn't really matter and there are some other reasons why it's in the consumer's interest to have Google with an unfair advantage in the browser market. So, competition policy is that dealing with the market failure, as it were, of monopoly power, price fixing, and all the other ways that big firms can restrict output and raise price. There are all sorts of policies that the government can consider using as competition policy. The main objectives of competition policy are to prevent the exploitation of monopoly power, that's price setting power by big firms, and to make sure that there is sufficient competition to reduce the costs of production for the benefit of the consumers. They also look at excess supernormal profit and try and make sure that there's enough competition to drive prices down towards marginal cost. And by removing entry and exit barriers, they can make markets more contestable, which will cause firms to behave as if they're in competition, which should benefit the consumer. And overall, their aim will be to improve economic efficiency, that's allocative and productive efficiency. So under what circumstances would we expect monopoly power to be preferable to competition? Well, the main two issues are when there are significant economies of scale, especially the network effects that come from utilities such as gas, electricity, and when the theory of creative destruction is active, where the competition authorities feel that the monopoly power comes from that firm having innovated and produced the best product. They don't want to discourage supernormal profit accruing for innovation because they want the economy to be dynamically efficient. There are different types of competition policy in the UK. To put it very simply, some of the policy is to do with current market power, known as monopoly policy. The UK body that deals with competition policy is the Competition and Markets Authority, CMA. This was a merger in 2013 of the Competition Commission and the Office of Fair Trading. The CMA considers the costs and benefits of any market it's considered and investigates. To identify whether a market might be a worry for the consumer, where there might be an adverse effect on competition, AEC, the CMA uses three indicators. It looks at market structure, whether there's a single dominant firm or the market is concentrated. It looks at market conduct, evidence of collusion, predatory pricing, vertical integration or control. As we said before, it's quite difficult for the CMA because very low prices might be good for the consumers or might be predatory, and high prices might be inevitable or might be something to do with collusion. And overall, it evaluates market performance. It says, does the market have high prices? Are there excess profits? Are there indications that the market is not performing properly and there's allocative and productive inefficiency? The Competition and Markets Authority also deals with mergers, because mergers are the major way in which firms can gain quick market power. So by looking at mergers, possibly stopping them before they happen, they can have a very significant effect on the level of competition in the UK. They typically look at mergers which cause more than 25% of market share or assets under control more than £70 billion. But the recent trends in the policy making of the CMA are to look more on conduct than pure structure of the market. They will investigate any merger that is expected to lead to a substantial lessening of competition, SLC. Britain, at the moment at any rate, is subject to European competition law too, and typically the European Union will investigate any merger where the companies have operations in more than one member country, which is quite a lot in today's globalised world. The theory of contestable markets, that potential competition might well be as good as actual competition if you can get rid of significant sunk costs and other barriers to entry and exit, means that the competition authorities in Britain have moved further and further away from just investigating where there's large market share, but instead focusing on the behaviour and performance of firms. In other words, as long as the market is behaving like competition, they don't mind too much at the level of concentration. So, what are the different types of competition policy in the UK, as laid out by the 1998 Competition Act, the 2002 Enterprise Act, and the 2013 Enterprise and Regulatory Reform Act, which created the Competition and Markets Authority? Well, they look very carefully at restrictive trade practices, mainly price fixing, price discrimination, refusal to supply certain customers or resale outlets, and full line forcing, where firms require the retailer to carry all their product line if they want to carry any. There are, of course, possible advantages of allowing monopoly, and the Competition and Markets Authority will weigh up the costs and benefits of any degree of market power. The two obvious advantages of large firms are economies of scale and the fact that if they're contestable, there's not going to be a real problem, even if they're concentrated. Merger policy doesn't usually result in a massive change. Under the Enterprise and Regulatory Reform Act of 2013, it is the Competition and Markets Authority which is responsible for investigating and judging whether mergers create an SLC and should be stopped. In the old days, the OFT used to refer mergers to the Competition Commission, and the Secretary of State would involve the government minister, in other words, would be highly involved in the process. Nowadays, the Competition and Markets Authority does both the investigation and the decision making on whether a merger should go ahead or not, and there's less intervention by the Secretary of State. However, in particular industries such as national security and issues, media industry, and industries which might affect the stability of the financial system, the Secretary of State will intervene in the interests, or rather the excuse of public interest. The textbook says the EU merger process is considered slow and opaque. I don't know if that's particularly true, but almost everything that happens in the EU is slow and opaque because it's such a big organisation. What does cause a lot of time wasting is the fact that almost invariably firms have to prepare for an investigation both by the European Union and by the British authorities, because it's never that clear which is going to have jurisdiction. So let's have a look at this article about the merger or proposed merger of Ladbrokes and Coral. This is a clear example of a horizontal merger where these two firms merging will leapfrog to being one of the biggest betting companies. So, which element of UK competition policy is being implemented here? Merger policy. Why is the merger of concern to the CMA? Well, you can see from the second paragraph that there could be a significant lessening of competition in a large number of local areas. And the Competition Authority has suggested that they might force the merged company to sell off shops to create more competition back in some of those local markets. It's worth noting that although there's not much room in the workbook to put this in, that we should be aware of the kind of enforcement actions the Competition and Markets Authority might take. So, it can prevent mergers from taking place. It can break up an existing monopoly. This is very rare. It could put price controls. It tends not to do that, but in certain regulated industries, you do find that price controls are more common, such as in the railways. It could impose rate of return controls, in other words, limiting the amount of profit any firm could take. Again, that's very unlikely in this day and age because it's more of a planned economy type approach. It could tax monopoly profit, and it could take the firms into state ownership. Under this government, that seems unlikely. It could promote deregulation and the removal of barriers to entry to make markets more contestable. Thank you for listening.